we got to talk getting into our coverage tonight. We really need to talk, unfortunately. And I say unfortunately because the elephant in the room, I'm just going to address it now, is JR, you are an Ohio State fan. Bless your heart. I am a Michigan fan. We got to get to what is probably this would have been big news if maybe they hadn't already lost 2 games this season. And this was the only, I think it was the only at the time top 25 matchup in the Big Ten this past week. But Michigan falls on the road to Illinois 21-7. Honestly, it wasn't that entirely close of a game. I'm just going to run through some stats and some analysis here. Michigan actually lost this game despite winning the yardage battle. Michigan had 322 yards of offense. Illinois only 267 yards of offense in this game. They won the third down and fourth down efficiency battle, more efficient on third and fourth down than Illinois, and they had more first downs. They also had 33 minutes of time of possession, which if you know math, that's more than Illinois. The story in this game for me was the turnovers. Illinois got 17 of their 21 points, and of course they had a 2-point conversion to make it seem like they scored 3 touchdowns. But they got 17 of their 21 points on drives that started all off of turnovers on the Michigan 38-yard line, their own 49, and their own 45. They had short fields all day. Luke Altmaier only had to go 9 of 19 for 80 yards and a touchdown to win this one. And Michigan's offense is on the side of a milk carton right now. I don't know what else to say. It's just Jack Tuttle, it turns out, not the guy. What say you about this game, JR, just kind of like broadly?
Yeah, this game did not play out the way I thought it would for an Illinois win. So I come away more impressed with Illinois than I do discouraged about Michigan in this one. I realize as an Ohio State fan saying discouraged about Michigan, obviously, as an Ohio State fan, I'm totally fine with it. But I'm just saying, like, for the team overall, because you look at the box score, Michigan threw for over 200 yards and they rushed for over 100 yards. Illinois threw for 80 yards and they rushed for nearly 200 yards. If you ask me, those two would have been flipped in this game. You would have thought Michigan would have thrown for 80 yards and rushed for 200, and it would have been Illinois that was throwing for 200 yards. But I guess Illinois was really channeling their 1924 and going for this one with the, really rushing the ball. They did throw it 18 times. I had a hard time when I put out my weekly grades for the quarterbacks. I had a hard time evaluating Luke Altmaier here because he did only throw for 80 yards, but he did have a touchdown. He did only complete 50% of his passes, but it seemed like whenever they needed him to get yards for the team, he did it with his legs. And I think that's something that was pretty impressive for Luke Altmaier to do. Jack Tuttle, I don't know where you go from here. I feel like if I'm Michigan, you just need to pick a quarterback and go with it. This whole going back and forth, and we'll talk about Michigan State later, I'm sure. But this whole thing that, Sherrone Moore is doing where he doesn't know which quarterback. And I don't know how much of that is he's just trying to hold back from Michigan State or if he actually doesn't know. I have no idea. Leads me to believe he doesn't actually know because he announced Orji as the starter on a Monday earlier in the season. So I feel like he wouldn't have a problem with doing it now. But this is one of those situations where I feel like if I'm Michigan, all 3 quarterbacks have strengths and weaknesses. I wouldn't say any of them have, impressed me to the level where any of them should be starting. So I feel like at this point, this week, Sherrone Moore just needs to figure out who his quarterback is. And honestly, I know that we're talking about 3 quarterbacks. It needs to be Jaden Davis. You need to put Jaden Davis on the field this week. Yeah, I think he's the future of this team, right? Even if you get Bryce Underwood, which I know that's the rumor out there, even if you get him for next year, you're going to need to see what you have in Jaden Davis right now. You can see what you have in practice, but let's look at, what their evaluations were of these 3 quarterbacks in practice before. You obviously didn't get a great evaluation. So I know the whole thing about Jaden Davis's parents and stuff like that. I get that. But if I'm Sherrone Moore, I'm going to those parents and being like, look, guys, this is best for us. This is best for your son to get out there and play. Say he only plays 4 games this season. He still has a red shirt. He can still redshirt. And so for me, I feel like that's the best option for Michigan. Obviously, if the parents don't want him to play, there's not really much you can do there. But at the end of the day, they just need to pick a quarterback and go with him.
Well, that's interesting that you bring that up because I strongly, strongly agree with you on some points. I really disagree with you actually on the Jaden Davis thing, which we can kind of circle back to in a minute if you want. But I have been saying since like the beginning, even in the preseason, I did a big video on Darren Talks Ball, of course, my other channel, about like evaluating all the Michigan quarterbacks they had on roster and kind of going over the like pros and cons of each one. And I'm pretty sure, if I remember right, my memory isn't as great as it used to be, being the age I am now, but I'm pretty sure I ended that off. And I've been saying ever since that you settle on a guy and you ride him out and you let him make some mistakes, learn from those mistakes, develop on the fly, and kind of do a lot of things that teams typically do when they enter a kind of a new phase or a new era, especially, new coach, new offensive coordinator, whole new setup. And now I think that they're paying the price for not having done that earlier in the season. Because you go back, and especially as a Michigan fan, I'm always in a season like this, you're always going back and thinking about the like, what if this or what if that? How much different would it be now? And you have to think, especially with how, like you said, Jack Tuttle threw for over 208 yards in this. He threw for 208 yards in this game, 20 of 32. It was a good performance for a Michigan quarterback, but what is the bar? That's the lowest of low bars I can think of right now. But then you have to go back and think about like, what if this team had just stuck it out with Davis Warren a little bit longer, or just stuck it out with him long term? Because the thing with Davis Warren was the turnovers. Outside of that, he was on film, at least from my review, and I'd be interested to see your opinion on this. He was more accurate than Tuttle. He wasn't missing guys on crossing routes 5 yards behind them. And then on like the first play of the game, they have that fade route they call for Amarian Walker down the sideline, which I like seeing Amarian Walker out there. I think he's played decent enough, especially with the state of this wide receiver room, to be out there. He's like 6'3". He can run. He's the only like true X wide receiver you have on this roster. But then he throws it up to him and it's like 5 yards short and 3 yards too far. It's just nowhere near him. Davis Warren was a more accurate passer, and it was just the interception problem. So then you move on from him because you're like, I don't know, feeling the pressure or whatever of having to have the guy then in the moment. Maybe the Texas game got in their heads or whatever. Move on to Alex Orji. Doesn't turn the ball over, but the offense isn't set up for a quarterback like him. And then you move on to Jack Tuttle now, who now apparently we're hearing was going to be the guy, but was injured and this or that, and just flat performance. I mean, it got some yards, but if you can't get any more than 7 points at the end of the day, what can you do with that? Turned it over a couple of times, a bad interception, another bad interception that got called back because of a weird penalty on the other side of the field, nowhere near the ball. And then, of course, a fumble, and a pretty bad one at that. It just feels like there was a point at which Michigan could have stuck it out with whoever they had picked at the beginning of the season, and they didn't. And now we've gone through this like quarterback musical chairs where none of these guys have the experience. None of these guys have gotten settled in. And just no matter who you get at this point, you're basically playing a first-year starter who is playing in their first few games.
Which is insane, right? Because this is what, Tuttle's 7th year? Like, the dude's 25 years old. I mean, he's darn near almost as old as me, which I know I'm not old, but still, like, I've been out of college for a while, so it's kind of wild to think he's still there. I really do agree with your point on Davis Warren. If you look at some of like the more in-depth stats with Davis Warren, he did throw 6 interceptions, but he only had 3 turnover-worthy throws, which means that they only put 3 of those interceptions, PFF that is, on Davis Warren. Now, I can't remember every single interception he threw, but I would like to go back and see those, because if I'm not mistaken, there were times when he threw interceptions that I said, I don't think that was Davis Warren's fault. Like, I think that was a receiver ran the wrong route or whatever. Like, and unfortunately, I think the Michigan quarterbacks are getting a lot of the blame for Ron Bellamy just being a terrible wide receiver coach.
Yeah.
He needs to go after this year. The wide receivers have never been fantastic under him. I mean, Michigan has a history of good wide receivers. Heck, they have a history of guys like Travis Hunter playing both ways, and Charles Woods. I mean, like they have guys like that have done amazing things, but you have Ron Bellamy in there, and unfortunately for them, this is what happens when you don't have JJ McCarthy, top 10 NFL draft pick, playing quarterback for you. And I do think Roman Wilson and Cornelius, what was his last name?
Johnson. Yeah.
I do think those guys were much talented than what you have now. And I do think Samaj Morgan is a talented athletic player, but I mean, when I watch Samaj Morgan, he looks as frustrated as can be, because I'm sure he's getting downfield at times and he's probably open. Obviously, we can't see it on the TV copy, but he's probably getting downfield a few times. And he's probably open. And he's just not getting the ball. So I'd be upset with him as well. But I agree with you on Davis Warren. I can definitely see why somebody would go back to Davis Warren. And honestly, it's been kind of weird that they haven't gone back to him at some point. And the other thing I'll bring up is that a lot of people talk about how Alex Orji didn't turn the ball over, which, yes, he has 1 interception to Davis Warren's 3, or to Davis Warren's 6. His turnover worthy throw percentage, Alex Orji's, is 3.5. Davis Warren's is 3.6. So
That's
it's honestly not that far.
Wow.
Yeah, it's honestly not that far off with each other. So I don't know. This is a weird one. I would probably go back to Davis Warren if Jaden Davis is an option. If not, I'd probably go to Alex Orji. We'll see what happens, but I feel like they're probably going to go with Jack Tuttle. I don't know what that prediction is. But at the same time, we also have to give credit to this Illinois defense as well, because this Illinois defense, they've had a problem stopping the run almost all year, and they've done a good job of playing pass defense and getting interceptions and stuff like that. And yeah, they had 1 in this game, but it was the forced fumbles and stuff like that they were able to cause. And I think Illinois, like I said, this is more about Illinois being a good team in my mind than Michigan not playing well. Not saying Michigan did play well, but I'm looking at this and saying Illinois, good team, did what they had to do to win the game.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Really, I do think that it was like you. It was a bit of a surprise how well Illinois did against the run game in this one. I think the thing we also need to bring up is, especially when I was doing kind of the I didn't end up doing a full prediction for this game, but when I previewed this game, I looked back on the Penn State game and thought Illinois is going to get run on by Michigan. And then I forgot, I kind of overlooked the fact that Penn State's run game, the way that they scheme it up, is actually much different from Michigan's. It actually frustrates the hell out of me as a Michigan fan, because like I see what Andy Kotelnicki is doing with like some Wildcat stuff. And like if you gave Alex Orji to Andy Kotelnicki, like he'd know what to actually do with him. Like he would have that guy running read option stuff and running it well. But they gave up a ton of rushing yards to Penn State a few weeks ago, but now they're faced against a Michigan team that runs between the tackles a lot more frequently, does a lot more like base stuff, but what they've always kind of hung their hat on is like doing it well, like running duo really effectively. And in this one, Illinois holds Michigan to 114 yards, like you said, but on 38 attempts, that's only 3 yards a rush. 3 yards a rush with also, again, all respect to Illinois, Michigan didn't play Khalil Mullins until like their 3rd drive of the game. He didn't see like a single snap until the 2nd or 3rd drive of the game. That is just egregious to me from a coaching standpoint. He is your best offensive player so far this season.
Yeah, I think Donovan Edwards finishes with only 7 carries. I mean, you look at the box score and you say Khalil Mullins got almost 3 times the carries that Donovan Edwards got, but you still had Donovan Edwards carrying the rock there more than he should have been until he fumbled there. So, I mean, I think at that point in time, if I'm remembering correctly, he didn't really see the ball after that, but it's just too late. Khalil Mullins needs to be the one toting the rock 20, 25 times a game, and you put Donovan Edwards in there every now and then to give Khalil Mullins a break. It's not the other way around. And honestly, I think Donovan Edwards is a really athletic player and has areas that he can contribute to the team in other ways as well. I think you can put him out, in the slot or something like that. They keep putting Colston Loveland out there wide, so why not throw Donovan Edwards in the slot? You can't tell me that this offense wouldn't be better if you had Colston Loveland outside, Samaj Morgan and Donovan Edwards both out there at wide receiver, and Khalil Mullins in running back. You can't tell me that's not the best option for this team right now.
It's been the consistent issue all season with this team is they're not. You as an Ohio State fan will probably appreciate this, but I reference what Urban Meyer always used to say on like his podcast appearances and stuff that I've listened to. You base your offense around who your best 11 offensive players are, and you run with that. And like Michigan's best 11 offensive players right now are like a 22 personnel, 2 tight ends, 2 running backs, and like Samaj Morgan occasionally out there, stuff like that. Yeah, it's frustrating. It's extremely frustrating. I'm sure not as frustrating for you as an Ohio State fan, but we'll move on. Of course.
Let me ask one more thing. Is Klein okay? I know he got hurt in this game. If we heard any more about him, I haven't heard anything.
I didn't actually get to see that. I didn't get to check in on it yet. I know Michigan as a whole is pretty banged up, actually. And it's something that's gotten like there were guys in that defensive line that are like redshirt freshmen and stuff in this game too that were filling in for guys who were pretty banged up. But speaking of feeling banged up, to try to transition as much as possible, I felt pretty banged up after this one because I was completely wrong on my prediction for this game. And speaking of kind of flipping stats, like if you would have told me that Iowa did what MSU did in this game, I'd be like, maybe not the 250 some yards of passing, but like definitely the rushing battle and time of possession battle and stuff. I'd be like, oh yeah, Iowa did Iowa things in this one. But MSU beats Iowa 32-20. Aiden Childs really looks like he's starting to come along. What were your overarching thoughts on this one? An upset, and against a team that I said literally last week on this show that I thought Iowa had a chance at the college football playoff still, and boy was I wrong.
Well, I mean, this is what you get when you have Cade McNamara struggling. I think at one point he had less completions than Michigan State had field goals made in the game, which is just absolutely baffling. But, when Cade McNamara is good, Cade McNamara is good. I'm not going to say he's one of the best in the league or something like that, but when he's good, he does a good job and he can be a good quarterback for you. But when he really struggles, you see it, and it's really hard for this offense to move. And in this game, Michigan State, they were not afraid of Cade McNamara at all. They said Cade McNamara is going to be the one who beats us, and the wide receivers are going to be the ones who beat us because our linebackers are going to play right up to the line of scrimmage, and we're not going to let you get anywhere. Now, Caleb Johnson did break off that 175-yard run, which accounts for over 50% of the rushing yards for Iowa.
Yeah.
Which is kind of crazy. But I mean, at the end of the day, like they did a really good job of stopping Caleb Johnson. Right now, the only two teams in the nation that have been able to stop Caleb Johnson are Michigan State and Ohio State. And, you have to give a lot of credit there. So I think everybody kind of knew that was the formula. And that's what Michigan State was able to do in this one. They gave it the one big run. But at the end of the day, I think the bigger storyline in this one is the tackling by Iowa. Just how terrible they were at tackling, which I do think you need to give Michigan State's receivers some credit with what they were able to do, yards after the catch and stuff like that. But my word, I can't remember the last time I saw this poor of a tackling effort by Iowa in a game. It was
from
horrendous.
A Phil Parker defense. I think they average like 3 or 4 missed tackles a game, and in this one they had 9 or 10, something even maybe
like that. I'll have to look it up.
It was like 3 times the amount of normal missed tackles. You bring up Caleb Johnson, outside of that 75-yard touchdown, he had 13 carries, averaging just 1.77 yards per carry in this game. Just completely shut down. And I didn't see it coming. Heading into the season, the defensive line, especially for Michigan State, was one of the biggest question marks after losing Derek Harmon in the transfer portal, having to bring in some guys kind of last minute in the transfer portal too, kind of really trying to rework that defensive line in the offseason and rebuild it. And it looks like they did a good job. Jonathan Smith is doing a good job over there in his first season. I think a lot of Michigan State fans, I have one of my best buddies is a Michigan State grad, and he was just hoping for anything this season. And to be 4-3 at this point and have this big win, 3 losses against a Boston College team who's decent, and then obviously Ohio State and Oregon, I think is kind of the ideal situation for Michigan State right now, in all honesty, compared to what they expected in year one of Jonathan Smith. And it's just crazy to go through the stats again, because 468 yards, by the way, on a Phil Parker defense is a lot of offensive movement. And again, Aiden Childs against the defense filled with, Quinn Schultes and Sebastian Castros, and a defense that plays a lot of zone and will get a lot of tips and overthrow interceptions and things. Against a interception-prone quarterback, I thought they'd get some more turnovers in this game, and they didn't. The turnover battle is even 1-1. And then the time of possession battle was absolutely lopsided. Michigan State had the ball for damn near, I think it was like 39 minutes and 40 seconds. And Iowa just didn't, without being able to run the ball and play that kind of efficiency monster style of ball that they usually play, they just couldn't do anything. They couldn't get out of their own way.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I mean, there was really nothing we saw from the Iowa offense in this one that gave you any hope. And I said on our show earlier, like this is where you get in trouble with Kirk Ferentz as your head coach. Kirk Ferentz has, him sticking with the game plan and stuff like that has worked at times, but then other times it just looks terrible. And this is what you have, because you have a team that kept trying to pound the rock, and it never worked. And then you had them try to get to Cade McNamara to throw the ball, and that still never worked. At some point, you had to go to Brendan Sullivan in this game if you wanted a chance to win the game. With the way your defense was playing, the way things were working, you needed a playmaker back there at quarterback, and you needed somebody that was able to hold on to the ball longer than 3 plays in one drive. And he wasn't, Cade McNamara wasn't able to do that. I get that Brendan Sullivan takes more sacks. I think that's the biggest thing, because when he was at Northwestern, he took a lot of sacks. I mean, there were I think he had a game where he had like 7 sacks on him. So, I mean, he does take a lot of sacks, and that's frustrating. But you do make up for that by being a playmaker, being able to get out of the pocket, move around, have a threat to be able to run. So that way it's not just Caleb Johnson the entire time. And unfortunately for them, they never went to him. And this is a situation where Kirk Ferentz's stubbornness, it really bit him in the butt, and it stinks for them. Darren, I did look up the missed tackles for Iowa, 19.
Oh my
PFF
God.
has 19 missed tackles. Jay Higgins with 3, Quinn Schulte with 3.
Higgins with 3.
Yeah.
He's been a great linebacker so far this season.
Yeah, he's not been tackling as well this season. Nwankpa with 3, the 5-star on their defense. John Nestor, he missed almost 50% of his attempted tackles. He had 3. Yeah, it was.
And I mean, when you assume any missed tackle means what? Anywhere between an extra 5 or 10 yards.
Typically, yeah.
That could really do you in at the end of the day. Yeah, that's Iowa. I like the fact that you bring up like kind of the limitations that Iowa has, because I think it's a lot of the same for Michigan and any team that kind of has that basic philosophy and approach to the game. The problem with it is the path to victory in any given game is just so narrow. You have to do so many things right. When it's all clicking, it looks like what you did to Washington. But when Caleb Johnson struggles a little bit, if the offensive line isn't getting all their blocks lined up quite right, if the defense, isn't doing their typical thing, if you're not playing the field position battle as well, which I don't think they did very well in this game at all, you're just not going to come out on top, and you need all those ducks lined up in a row to come out with victories consistently. But I know you're a little short on time tonight. You got to go over and do the Ohio State call-in show. So we're going to get to the story of college football so far this season, and I'm already doing it. I'm doing it. You guys can tell me I'm crazy. I'm putting Ohio State on upset alert when they play this team. Indiana, my God, nearly 500 yards of offense on who was leading into this one, and it really makes me start to question this man's rankings and everything about him. For the 500 yards of offense on what was the SP Plus #1 defense headed into this past week, 56-7, an absolute beatdown. JR, what are your main takeaways from this game?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the scariest thing that happened with Indiana in this game is that Curtis Rourke went down and they never missed a beat with Taven Jackson in there.
Yeah.
Now, you could argue that Nebraska wasn't, playing as hard when Taven Jackson was in there, and I get that. They definitely weren't flying around like you normally see them flying around, so I can definitely get that. But Taven Jackson did not look like the Taven Jackson that we saw last year. Last year, he had 2 touchdown passes, 5 interceptions, something like that.
Yep.
Just turns out when your head coach is Tom Allen and when your head coach is Kirk Cignetti, your quarterback's going to play a whole lot better. And I think that Taven Jackson really proved himself to be one of the best backup quarterbacks in all of college football this game by being able to come in here against a really good defense in Nebraska and be able to throw and get 7 for 8, 91 yards, 2 touchdown passes. He had more touchdown passes than Curtis Rourke had. So
it was crazy. I'm glad you brought that up first, because I did a video on this game on my channel, and Darren talks about it earlier today, and I brought that up where like Curtis Rourke goes down and this team doesn't miss a single beat. They are just annihilating everybody offensively. And the scary thing right now, I think, really with Indiana is we saw them in a lot of games where the final score wasn't really indicative of how the game had actually gone. I think it was their game against Maryland and their game against some other opponents, even against Biff Poggi's team, Charlotte. It was like a 3-point game or a 7-point game in a lot of those games, like midway through the third quarter or even entering the fourth quarter in some of those, and they pull away late. And I was feeling a little like this team could be really great. They've got a lot of potential. It's not just a team that's being carried by like a generational quarterback kind of thing, like we see sometimes of these kind of like Cinderella stories. It's not like a, Ashton Jeanty kind of carrying Boise State thing right now. Like they have great players across the board, offensively and defensively. But to see them like come right out, jump the gun on Nebraska, a team that I thought would be a good, decent Big Ten team coming into the season, and just throttle them and really outplay them at all 3 phases of the game was eye-opening to me, to say the least. By the way, if you want to get into it, Dylan Raiola, just oof.
Yeah, this is what you get when you rely on a freshman quarterback to win you games, which I'm not saying you shouldn't do at times. Obviously, you're going to have to rely on your quarterback to do that. But in this game, Nebraska did not run the ball well enough. They were 2.4 yards per carry, which I get there were some sacks in there and stuff like that. And I think Nayor had a backward, what was it, screen pass or jet sweep or something like that, where that did take away some yards. And so, like at the end of the day, you have to run the ball better if you're going to beat a team like Indiana. And I think that's what Indiana did in this game. Is they said, look, we know Dylan Raiola is going to need help. We know he's going to have to be able to have a running game. And I think one of the biggest things was, I think it was the second drive for Nebraska when what was it? Was it Dowdell that fumbled that ball on 4th and 1, which, you know, it really isn't that big of a deal. You fumble on 4th and 1, but I think he would have got it if he didn't fumble. So at the end of the day, like that felt like a big turning factor there or turning point there, where it felt like if Nebraska was going to win this game, it was going to be Dylan Raiola doing it, which I thought Nebraska's wide receivers would give Indiana's cornerbacks a little bit of a harder time because of how big they are. And I thought Nebraska would have capitalized on that. But I think if you're Nebraska, you are having serious second thoughts about Scott Satterfield as your offensive coordinator right now. Now they are 5-2. You know, this has not been a bad offense. This hasn't been an Iowa offense and stuff like that where they're one dimensional all year. So I'm not saying that, you know, he needs to be fired or anything like that. But I do think in this one, there was a very obvious way that you were going to be able to capitalize on Indiana. And I just didn't see him go to it very often. Now, credit Indiana. They were doing a lot of, double coverage on the outside the numbers and stuff like that, where you would normally throw the ball up. So I do give Indiana credit there. But with how big some of these wide receivers were, you had to at least give it a shot a few times, and it felt like they never really did. And so, for me, if I'm a Nebraska fan, I'm having some serious second thoughts about Scott Satterfield right now after last year with all the turnovers, and this year in this game against Indiana. I mean, I'm looking at it and I'm like, what are we doing here? We really need to evaluate this as the rest of the year goes on.
Yeah, I'm glad. I really like your analysis there. And I in a way, see Dylan Raiola coming in as a freshman quarterback and everything that they've kind of put on his plate. And in an interesting way, kind of liken it to what's been done with Aiden Childs at MSU. It's almost like go out there, sling it. We're going to run our offense full bore, everything we like to do right off the bat, make your mistakes, learn from them, and let's come back next year or what have you. No, like you said, they're still 5-2, but you also look at like their only 2 losses are an Indiana team that may be a really great team. We'll know more about them, especially when they play Ohio State in a few weeks, and Illinois, who is I'd say a fairly good Big Ten team. It's also really hard to sort out this Big Ten with everything going on outside of like what I would argue are the obvious top 4 teams. But it's just wild to me too when you look at the like structure of Nebraska's offense from a personnel standpoint. They've got a very experienced offensive line outside of, I think they're playing 1 sophomore at guard. They have 2 really good wide receivers who are, like you said, bigger body guys, experienced guys, 2 experienced running backs that I think are pretty good running backs in Dowdell and Johnson, a decent tight end. Like you've got the support cast for Raiola. If you had just really focused on running the ball better, especially in fall camp, and made that kind of the emphasis of your team and your approach, running the football better, utilizing your tight end more, doing all the kind of things you typically do to kind of get a freshman quarterback, worked into your system. And it just seems like right from the get-go this season, they didn't really do that with him. They were like, we're going to lean on Raiola and go as far as he can take us. And where he takes you is in this game, especially 5.3 yards per attempt and 3 interceptions, 28 of 44 for 234 yards. And at times, honestly, he kind of looked, anytime there's pressure, he seems to be holding on the ball for too long. He steps up in the pocket and instantly his footwork isn't right, which makes him miss passes. It's just typical freshman quarterback stuff. But to your point, the offensive coordinator over there should know what he was getting into when they started a freshman quarterback.
Yeah, totally. And I think that, Nebraska, they've gotten too complacent with running between the tackles, especially in this game. Like I said, when you have the receivers with the size advantage that they have, these receivers should be able to be on the outside and block these tiny cornerbacks like 5, 6, 7 yards down the field. And they weren't really doing that. Like they weren't getting to the outside and allowing for their wide receivers to have the size advantage. So, I mean, I look at it and I'm like, what in the world is Scott Satterfield thinking? Like, I get you want to run, an offense that, features your 5-star quarterback who has played well this season. I mean, he's
Mhm.
definitely had his stinkers, but I mean, I think overall, like Dylan Raiola has been a good quarterback so far this season, especially considering his age. I mean, he's going up against, Cade McNamara is 24 years old. Will Howard's
What
23, 24 years old. Will
what
Rogers is
recruiting class
23.
was Cade in? Was it, like, the same as, like,
I think he was
who's the dude from
20.
Utah? Like,
Was,
all those dudes?
yeah, I don't think he's as old as Jack Tuttle. I think he's 1 year
Okay,
less than Tuttle. I think he's in his sixth
okay.
year. But
That's
yeah, I mean, the Big Ten has a ton of guys who are over 22 years old playing quarterback right now, and then it's like Dylan Raiola and Aiden Childs that
yeah,
are just trying to survive for their lives at
who aren't
19 and
even
18
close
years
to
old.
being old enough to drink. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
nuts. Yeah.
Um, so I do think that you have to give some credit there with the age and stuff, but for the most part, I don't see Scott Satterfield capitalizing on areas that would help Dylan Raiola and this young quarterback do what he needs to do to win
Mhm.
games. I see him relying too much on an 18-year-old when he has other avenues that he should be trying to go for. And
Yeah.
I think it's concerning for Nebraska fans. Obviously, Tony White is the real deal, but as a Nebraska Rascal put in there, Ed Foley, special teams, Scott Satterfield, OC. I'm not quite there with Satterfield yet. I think you need to see more this
Mhm.
season. Ed Foley definitely should go. But Satterfield, he's definitely on that cusp right now where if things don't get better for the offense, Matt Rule's going to have to move on from his buddy. And I know that's
Yeah.
hard because Matt Rule's been with him for a long time, but it's not going to cut it at Nebraska. They want to win.
It's just a lot of square peg round hole in the approach like we've been talking about. By the way, the special teams, a couple points on that. I think Nebraska's down there in like the triple digits in SP plus special teams still. And how wild is it? Maybe we can kind of talk about this for a second before we get into our previews, but how wild is it that there are so many Big Ten teams uncharacteristically struggling with special teams this season in general? I feel like every week there's missed field goals, bad punts. Even Michigan, Tommy Doman, who was a pretty good punter last year, shanking one in this game. It's been wild. It's been a very outside of the who I think are the solid four best teams in this conference. It's been a lot of tumultuous play across the board for a lot of these teams, and even in special teams, which is usually, we talk about Big Ten football. You talk about running the ball, playing defense, and playing great special teams.
Yeah, I mean Doman, he struggled this season. He had that I think it was a good snap in the game against Illinois,
Mhm.
but he fumbled the snap and made it hard. I mean, that definitely wasn't on Zavada. Zavada's a fantastic kicker. He in my
Yeah,
eyes, he can't do
yeah,
anything wrong. Like, if he misses the field goal, it's the wind's fault or something because
right, right.
he's an ace. But yeah, Doman, I don't think he has a single punt that's been inside the 20-yard line this season, which that's very uncharacteristic for a
Mhm.
Michigan punter. And you're right, all over the Big Ten, we're seeing special teams issues and stuff like that we're not really used to seeing. Iowa has struggled with their special
Yeah,
teams this season as well, and that's something that's been uncharacteristic of an Iowa team under Kirk Ferentz. So at the end of the day, like
Rutgers has struggled at times to make field goals and things, which is they have a coach who was a special
right,
teams guy. Like, yeah,
exactly, and
Washington,
he was
yeah.
under Urban, where Urban preached that kind of stuff, that like special
Mhm.
teams, special teams, special teams, and Greg Schiano, it's not going for him this year. So
Yeah.
a lot of uncharacteristic stuff like that, like you said.